To escape a forced marriage, she boldly kissed her Uber driver, turning heads in the process. What seemed like a desperate act would soon flip her world upside down. Little did she know, her escape was just the beginning. The opulent ballroom of the Greystone Manor was a spectacle of grandeur. Chandeliers glittered above rows of tables adorned with gold-trimmed linens and lavish floral arrangements. Despite the luxury, Amelia Carlton, the bride-to-be, felt like a prisoner. Draped in a designer wedding gown that clung to her like chains, she stared at her reflection in the ornate mirror of the bridal suite. Her hands trembled as she adjusted the diamond-studded veil, the heavy fabric an emblem of her impending fate. This wasn't the life she'd envisioned. A forced marriage to Lionel Harrington, a man twice her age and notorious for his ruthless business practices, was a deal brokered by her father to save their family's failing empire. Think of the legacy, Amelia, her father had pleaded the night before. His eyes, hollow and desperate, mirrored the weight of their financial collapse. This is the only way. Amelia clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. "I'm not a pawn, Father," she had replied, her voice cracking under the weight of her defiance. Yet here she was, hours away from the ceremony that would strip her of any remaining autonomy. The antique clock in the corner chimed, each note like a nail in her coffin. Amelia glanced at the door, hearing the faint chatter of bridesmaids and the shuffle of attendants. Time was running out. She crouched near her vanity, pulling out a hidden backpack she'd prepared in secret over the past week. Inside were the tools for her escape: a pair of sneakers, a plain black dress, a cheap phone, and a wad of cash she'd painstakingly saved from her allowance. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind. "You're stronger than you know, my darling." Those words, spoken during happier times, gave her the courage to rise. She slipped out of her heels, replacing them with sneakers, and peeled off the cumbersome gown, donning the simple dress. The veil and diamonds were discarded in a heap. Amelia opened the side window of the bridal suite, the cold evening air biting her skin. She hoisted herself onto the ledge, glancing down at the garden below. It was a long drop, but freedom was worth the risk. With a deep breath, she swung her legs over and climbed down the trellis, her heart pounding with each step. As she reached the ground, her feet landed softly on the damp grass. The distant hum of music from the ballroom reminded her of the stakes. She darted toward the back gate, sticking to the shadows. The cool night air filled her lungs, each step a silent rebellion against the fate her family had chosen for her. "Miss Carlton!" A sharp voice barked from behind her. A guard. Panic surged through her veins as she picked up her pace. Her sneakers hit the cobblestones with urgency. She could hear the guard's footsteps growing louder. She rounded a corner and froze. A sleek black car idled near the service entrance, its engine humming softly. An idea sparked. Without hesitation, Amelia approached the car and yanked open the back door. The driver turned in surprise, a man in his late 20s with sharp features and piercing blue eyes. "Drive," she ordered, her voice trembling with urgency. The man raised an eyebrow, his gaze flickering to the gown still partially visible beneath her coat. "Are you in some kind of trouble?" he asked, his voice calm but commanding. "Yes," she hissed, "and unless you want to explain why you let me get caught, you'll start the car." He studied her for a moment before nodding. "Buckle up." The car roared to life, and Amelia felt a rush of relief as they sped down the winding estate driveway. The mansion and its oppressive expectations shrank in the rearview mirror. "Thank you," she muttered, leaning back against the seat. The man glanced at her in the mirror, a hint of a smirk playing on his lips. "You're welcome, but you might want to explain who exactly you're running from." Amelia hesitated. Trust wasn't something she could afford. "Just someone I can't marry," she said vaguely. "Well," he replied, his tone laced with intrigue, "you've certainly picked an interesting way to make your getaway." What Amelia didn't know was that the man behind the wheel, Adrian Blackwell, wasn't just a driver. He was a reclusive tycoon, the secretive CEO of Blackwell Industries, who had taken the wheel that night for reasons of his own. Fate, it seemed, had just brought two very different worlds crashing together. The car sped down the winding roads, leaving the grandeur of the Greystone Manor far behind. Amelia clutched her coat tightly, her heart still racing. She glanced nervously over her shoulder, half expecting Lionel's guards to appear at any moment. Adrian, the enigmatic driver, noticed her tense demeanor. "Relax," he said, his voice calm yet authoritative. No one's following us. For now. For now, she echoed, her tone sharp. You don't sound very reassuring. He gave a faint smile, keeping his eyes on the road. Let me guess. You don't trust anyone right now? Amelia hesitated. He wasn't wrong. Trusting someone had landed her in the very situation she was trying to escape. Why should I? She countered. You don't even know me. I know enough, he replied smoothly. You're running from something big, and you're willing to risk everything to escape. Amelia frowned, her thoughts swirling. He was too perceptive. What are you, a therapist? Something like that, Adrian said cryptically. He eased the car into a quieter side street, away from the main roads. Where do you want me to take you? Amelia blinked, realizing she hadn't thought that far ahead. She had no plan, no destination, just a vague hope that freedom would be enough. Somewhere safe, she said finally. Adrian's expression didn't change, but his grip on the steering wheel tightened slightly. Safe is a relative term, he muttered. The silence between them grew heavy, broken only by the hum of the engine. As they approached an intersection, Adrian slowed the car. The glow of approaching headlights caught Amelia's attention, and her breath hitched. A sleek black SUV was parked ahead, its tinted windows facing them like watchful eyes. That's them, she whispered, panic rising. They've found me. Adrian's jaw tightened as he scanned the scene. The SUV's doors opened, and two men stepped out, their suits tailored and their postures menacing. Stay calm, Adrian instructed, his voice low and steady. We'll get through this. They'll drag me back, Amelia hissed. I can't. Trust me, Adrian interrupted, his gaze sharp. Play along. Before she could question him, Adrian unbuckled his seatbelt and leaned toward her. What are you? In one swift motion, Adrian cupped her face with a hand that was both firm and gentle. His lips met hers in a kiss so sudden and unexpected that it took her breath away. Time seemed to freeze. Amelia's initial shock melted into a confusing mix of emotions. Desperation, fear, and something she couldn't quite name. The footsteps outside the car stopped abruptly. The men exchanged confused glances before one of them called out, Miss Carlton, you're coming with us. Step out of the vehicle. Adrian pulled back just enough to whisper against her lips, Trust me. He pressed a button on the dashboard and the windows rolled down. Can we help you? He asked, his tone nonchalant, as if they'd interrupted nothing more than a casual evening. The guards looked at him suspiciously. This is none of your business. Step away from the car. Adrian raised an eyebrow, his lips curling into a faint smirk. It looks like she's my business now. Amelia's cheeks burned, but she forced herself to lean closer to him, playing along. Leave us alone, she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I'm not going back. One of the men stepped forward, his jaw tightening. You don't understand. Oh, I understand perfectly. Adrian cut in, his voice like steel. But if you think you're dragging her out of here without consequences, you've underestimated me. The way he spoke made Amelia pause. There was an undeniable authority in his tone, a quiet confidence that hinted at something far beyond his role as a driver. The guards hesitated, their confidence wavering. You don't know who you're dealing with, one of them said. Adrian's smirk deepened. Neither do you. The tension hung thick in the air, but the guards finally relented, retreating to their SUV. Adrian didn't move until they drove off, their taillights disappearing into the night. Amelia exhaled shakily, her pulse still racing. What was that? Adrian leaned back in his seat, his expression unreadable. An improvised solution. You kissed me, she exclaimed, her voice rising. You're welcome, he said dryly, starting the car again. It worked, didn't it? Amelia opened her mouth to argue, but stopped. He was right. The kiss had thrown them off enough to buy time. Still, the memory of it lingered in her mind, leaving her both flustered and confused. Who are you? She demanded, crossing her arms. You're not just some driver, are you? Adrian glanced at her, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. Let's just say I'm someone who knows how to handle situations like these. That's not an answer, Amelia pressed. I deserve to know who I just kissed. Adrian chuckled softly, his gaze returning to the road. All in good time, Amelia. The way he said her name sent a shiver down her spine. For now, she was too exhausted to push further. But one thing was certain. This night was far from over, and Adrian Blackwell was no ordinary man. The car wove through the dimly lit streets of the city, the hum of the engine the only sound breaking the silence between them. Amelia stared out of the window, her mind racing with questions. Who was Adrian Blackwell? And why did he seem so confident, so composed, even in the face of Lionel's men? She glanced sideways at him. Adrian's posture was relaxed, his hands steady on the wheel, but his sharp gaze flicked between the road and the rearview mirror. He had the air of someone who was always in control, someone who had nothing to fear. "Are you going to tell me where we're going?" she asked finally, breaking the silence. "To safety," Adrian replied without looking at her. "That's not an answer," she snapped. "I've had enough of people deciding my fate without consulting me." Adrian sighed, his lips curving into a faint smile. "Fair enough. We're heading to a property I own on the outskirts of the city. It's secure and off the grid." "A property you own?" Amelia raised an eyebrow. "For a driver, you seem to live quite the luxurious life." Adrian's smile deepened, and for the first time that night he laughed, a deep, rich sound that caught her off guard. "I suppose I owe you some honesty," he said. "But first, let's get you out of danger." Amelia leaned back in her seat, frustrated but too exhausted to argue. The events of the evening were beginning to weigh on her, leaving the only home she'd ever known, standing up to Lionel, and the lingering sensation of Adrian's lips on hers. She shook her head, trying to focus. There was no time to dwell on fleeting moments. As they left the city behind, the roads grew quieter. They turned onto a private drive flanked by tall trees that cast long shadows in the moonlight. At the end of the path stood a sprawling estate, its modern architecture gleaming under the stars. Amelia's jaw dropped. "This is your house?" Adrian parked the car and turned to her, his expression unreadable. "One of them." "One of them?" she repeated, stunned. "What kind of driver owns a mansion?" Adrian stepped out of the car without answering, walking around to open her door. "Come on," he said, offering his hand. "You'll be safe here." She hesitated before taking his hand, her curiosity outweighing her caution. As they entered the house, the interior was just as impressive as the exterior. High ceilings, sleek furniture, and floor-to-ceiling windows created an atmosphere of understated elegance. "Why didn't you just take me to a hotel?" Amelia asked, her voice tinged with suspicion. Adrian turned to face her, his gaze steady. "Because Lionel would have found you there, and because I have the resources to protect you." "Resources?" Amelia crossed her arms. "Are you going to stop being cryptic and tell me who you really are?" Adrian sighed and ran a hand through his dark hair. "You're persistent. I'll give you that." "I've had to be," she shot back. "Now talk." "All right." He leaned against the kitchen counter, his demeanor calm yet serious. "I'm Adrian Blackwell, CEO of Blackwell Enterprises." Amelia blinked, her mind reeling. "The Adrian Blackwell? The tech tycoon who's always on the cover of business magazines?" He gave a slight nod. "The one and only." She stared at him, trying to reconcile the confident billionaire she'd read about with the man who had been driving her through the city just hours ago. "Why on earth were you pretending to be a driver?" Adrian's expression hardened slightly. "I have my reasons. Let's just say it's easier to gather information and move unnoticed when people underestimate you." Amelia's eyes narrowed. "So this whole thing was some kind of game for you?" "No," Adrian said firmly. "I take my work and my privacy very seriously. Tonight, I happen to be in the right place at the right time." "Right place at the right time," she echoed, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "And now you've dragged me into your world. Or did I drag you into mine?" Adrian smiled faintly. "A bit of both, I think." Amelia shook her head, still trying to process everything. "This is insane. I kissed a stranger to escape a forced marriage, and now I'm standing in a billionaire's mansion." "It's not the worst twist of fate," Adrian quipped. She glared at him. "It's not your life that's been turned upside down." His expression softened. "You're right, and I'll do everything I can to help you." Amelia wasn't sure why, but she believed him. There was something in his eyes, an honesty, a sincerity, that made her want to trust him. "Fine," she said after a long pause, "but if I'm staying here, I want answers. About you, about why you're helping me, and about what you're hiding." Adrian nodded, his gaze steady. "You'll get your answers, but first, you need rest." She opened her mouth to protest, but exhaustion was beginning to catch up with her. With a reluctant nod, she followed him up the grand staircase to a guest room that was more luxurious than any hotel she'd ever seen. As she sank into the plush bed, Amelia stared at the ceiling, her mind spinning with everything that had happened. She had no idea what the next day would bring, but one thing was certain. Her life would never be the same, and neither, it seemed, would Adrian Blackwell's. The morning light filtered through the expansive windows, bathing the room in a soft glow. Amelia stirred, momentarily disoriented by her opulent surroundings. Then the memories of the previous night came rushing back. Her escape, Adrian's revelation, and the mansion she now found herself in. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called hesitantly. Adrian entered, looking as polished as ever in a tailored gray suit. He carried a tray with breakfast, a mix of fresh pastries, fruit, and coffee. "Good morning," he said, setting the tray on the small table by the window. "I thought you might need some sustenance before we figure out our next move." Amelia raised an eyebrow. "So you're playing the role of both savior and chef now?" Adrian smirked. "I aim to please." She sat down and took a sip of coffee, the warmth spreading through her. "Thank you," she said softly, though her tone was still guarded. "But I don't understand why you're going to all this trouble. You don't even know me." Adrian sat across from her, his expression serious. "Maybe not, but I know what it's like to feel trapped. And I know Lionel Stokes. He's not the kind of man you walk away from easily." His words sent a chill down her spine. "You've dealt with him before?" "In business, yes," Adrian admitted. "He's ruthless, manipulative, and always gets what he wants. But this isn't just about him. It's about you." His gaze locked onto hers. "You deserve to live your life on your own terms, Amelia." The sincerity in his voice made her chest tighten, but she refused to let her guard down completely. "So what's the plan?" she asked, steering the conversation back to practical matters. Adrian leaned back in his chair, his sharp mind clearly at work. "First, we need to make sure Lionel doesn't find you. That means staying off the grid. No phone calls, no credit cards. He's likely using every resource to track you down." "And then?" she pressed. Adrian hesitated for a moment before speaking. "We gather evidence against him. If he's trying to force you into marriage, it's likely tied to something bigger. Business, politics, or power. I have resources that can help us uncover his motives." Amelia frowned. "And if we can't find anything?" "We will," Adrian said firmly. "But if not, I'll ensure you have the means to disappear. Somewhere safe where he can't touch you." The weight of his words sank in, and for the first time Amelia realized the full extent of what she'd done by running. This wasn't just a dramatic escape. It was a declaration of war against a man who wouldn't hesitate to retaliate. "I can't hide forever," she said quietly. "I need to face him eventually." "And you will," Adrian assured her. "But on your terms, not his." Before she could respond, a soft chime echoed through the room. Adrian pulled out his phone, his expression darkening as he read the screen. "What is it?" Amelia asked, her heart racing. "Lionel's men," Adrian said grimly. "They're already here." Amelia's blood ran cold. "Here? At the house?" "No," Adrian said quickly. "But nearby. They've been spotted in the area. We need to leave, now." Amelia stood, adrenaline surging through her veins. "Where will we go?" "To a place they won't think to look," Adrian said, already moving to gather a small bag. "I have another property about an hour away. It's even more secure than this one." She followed him out of the room, her pulse pounding in her ears. "How do you know they're after me?" Adrian glanced at her, his jaw tightening. "Because Lionel wouldn't let you go without a fight, and because I've intercepted some of his communications." Amelia froze. "Intercepted? How?" He hesitated for a split second before replying. "Let's just say I have a few tricks up my sleeve. We don't have time for details right now." Despite her fear, she couldn't help but feel a flicker of admiration for his confidence and resourcefulness. "All right," she said, following him down the grand staircase. "Let's get out of here." They exited through a side door, where a sleek black SUV awaited them. Adrian handed her a pair of sunglasses and a hat. "Put these on. If anyone's watching, we don't want them recognizing you." Amelia obeyed, climbing into the passenger seat as Adrian slid behind the wheel. The engine roared to life, and they sped down the private drive, leaving the estate behind. For a while, neither of them spoke. The tension in the car was palpable, and Amelia couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Every passing vehicle, every shadow on the road seemed like a potential threat. "Are we being followed?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not yet," Adrian replied. But they'll figure out where we were soon enough. We need to stay ahead of them. He drove with precision, taking back roads and avoiding major highways. Amelia couldn't help but notice how calm he seemed, as though this wasn't the first time he'd been in a high-stakes situation. Finally, she broke the silence. "Why are you doing this, Adrian? Really?" He glanced at her briefly before turning his attention back to the road. "Because I can, and because no one deserves to be treated like a pawn in someone else's game." His answer was simple, but it carried a weight that made her believe him. For the first time in days, she felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone as she'd thought. As they approached their destination, Adrian's phone buzzed again. He answered it with a terse, "What?" A voice on the other end spoke rapidly, too faint for Amelia to make out. Adrian's expression darkened, and he ended the call with a curt nod. "What now?" Amelia asked, dreading the answer. Adrian's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "Lionel knows I'm involved. He's not just after you anymore. He's coming for both of us." The SUV pulled into the driveway of an unassuming cabin nestled deep within a dense forest. The structure was modest compared to Adrian's mansion, but the surrounding trees offered natural concealment, and the absence of nearby roads gave it an air of isolation. "This is it," Adrian said, turning off the engine. He stepped out and scanned the area with the sharp eyes of someone accustomed to anticipating danger. Amelia followed him, her nerves on edge. "This seems remote." "It's supposed to be," Adrian replied, unlocking the cabin door with a key hidden beneath a loose plank on the porch. "The fewer people around, the harder it is for anyone to track us." Inside, the cabin was cozy but functional. The living room held a leather couch and a small fireplace, while the kitchen was stocked with non-perishable supplies. A staircase led to a loft with a bed visible through the wooden railings. Amelia dropped onto the couch, exhaustion finally catching up to her. "How long can we stay here before they find us?" Adrian set down their bags and leaned against the counter. "Long enough. Lionel's people will focus on the mansion first. They'll assume I'm arrogant enough to stay in my own territory." "And you're not?" Amelia asked with a faint smirk. Adrian chuckled. "Arrogance only works when you control the board. Right now, we're just pawns trying to survive." His words unsettled her. She hated the thought of being a pawn, a tool for Lionel's power play. "So what's our next move?" Adrian sat across from her, his expression thoughtful. "We need to stay ahead of Lionel's men, but we also need leverage." "What kind of leverage?" Adrian pulled out a sleek laptop from one of the bags and opened it. "Evidence. Information that can expose Lionel's dealings. If we can make him vulnerable, he'll have no choice but to back off." Amelia watched as he typed with practiced ease, the screen flooding with encrypted files and lines of code. "And you just have access to this kind of thing?" "I have resources," Adrian replied cryptically. "And allies." Amelia's curiosity flared. "Who exactly are you, Adrian? I mean, really, you're not just some wealthy recluse, are you?" He hesitated, his fingers pausing over the keyboard. "Let's just say my family's name carries weight in certain circles. I've spent my life staying out of the spotlight, but I've had to learn how to protect myself and those I care about." Amelia studied him, sensing the layers of complexity beneath his polished exterior. "And now you're protecting me." Adrian's eyes met hers, his gaze unwavering. "Yes." Before she could respond, the laptop emitted a soft beep. Adrian's focus snapped back to the screen. "There," he muttered, pulling up a file. "These are internal communications from Lionel's company." Amelia leaned closer, scanning the screen. The documents detailed questionable financial transactions and confidential emails hinting at illegal dealings. "This is serious. How did you get this?" "I have a contact inside his organization," Adrian said. "Someone who doesn't agree with his methods." "A mole?" Amelia asked, her voice low with disbelief. "Exactly. And they've just sent us something big." Adrian clicked on another file, revealing a spreadsheet with coded entries. "This looks like a list of offshore accounts." Amelia's breath hitched. "If we can connect those accounts to illegal activity, we can take Lionel down," Adrian finished. His tone was steady, but a flicker of satisfaction crossed his face. Before they could delve deeper, Adrian's phone buzzed. He glanced at the caller ID and frowned. "Stay here," he instructed, stepping outside to answer. Amelia listened intently, but his voice was muffled. The tension in his tone, however, was unmistakable. She stood and paced the room, her anxiety mounting. Every creak of the cabin seemed louder, every shadow outside the window more menacing. When Adrian returned, his expression was grim. "We have a problem." Amelia's stomach dropped. "What is it?" "My contact," Adrian said. "They've been compromised. Lionel's people are closing in on them, and if they're caught, they'll spill everything," Amelia finished, her voice rising. "Including where we are." Adrian nodded. "We need to act fast. If we can extract them and secure their information, it might buy us some time." "How?" Amelia asked, her heart pounding. "Lionel has resources everywhere." Adrian's jaw tightened. "So do I." Within an hour, Adrian had made contact with his network of allies, arranging for a discreet extraction. He and Amelia prepared to leave the cabin, their window of safety rapidly shrinking. "Are you sure about this?" Amelia asked as they loaded into the SUV. "Going back into Lionel's territory seems like a death wish." Adrian glanced at her, his expression unwavering. "If we don't take risks, we lose the game." His words echoed in her mind as they drove into the night, the shadows of their pursuers growing ever closer. The black SUV sped along a winding, desolate road. The headlights cut through the thick darkness, revealing the dense trees flanking them on either side. Amelia gripped the door handle, her heart pounding with each turn Adrian took. His focus on the road was unwavering, but the tension in his jaw betrayed the gravity of their mission. "Where exactly are we going?" Amelia asked, breaking the silence. Adrian glanced at her briefly, his tone steady. "An industrial complex on the outskirts of the city. My contact was last seen there, but we need to move fast. If Lionel's men reach them first, it's over." "And this contact?" Amelia hesitated. "Why would they risk their life to help us?" Adrian's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "Not everyone working for Lionel agrees with his methods. My contact has a personal stake in this, something Lionel took from them. They want him exposed as much as we do." Amelia nodded, her mind racing. Every second felt like a countdown to a moment she couldn't control, and the stakes seemed impossibly high. The SUV skidded to a stop near a dimly lit warehouse on the edge of the industrial complex. The area was eerily quiet, save for the distant hum of machinery. Adrian killed the engine and turned to Amelia. "Stay close to me," he said, his voice firm, "and if anything goes wrong, get back in the car and drive." "What about you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll handle it," Adrian replied, his gaze locking onto hers. "Promise me you'll get out if things turn south." Amelia swallowed hard and nodded. "I promise." Adrian exited the SUV, moving with calculated precision. Amelia followed, her nerves taut as they approached the warehouse. The massive structure loomed over them, its rusted exterior a testament to years of neglect. Adrian led the way to a side entrance, his movements swift and silent. He pulled out a small device and attached it to the electronic lock. Within seconds, the door clicked open. They slipped inside, the air thick with the scent of oil and metal. The interior of the warehouse was a labyrinth of machinery, storage units, and narrow corridors. Adrian navigated the space with confidence, his every step purposeful. Amelia stayed close, her eyes darting around for any sign of danger. They stopped at a metal staircase leading to an elevated office. Adrian motioned for her to wait as he ascended the stairs. The faint glow of a monitor illuminated the room, revealing a figure hunched over a laptop. "Reed," Adrian called softly. The figure turned, revealing a man in his mid-30s with disheveled hair and a weary expression. He looked up, relief washing over his face. "Adrian, thank God." Adrian entered the room, gesturing for Amelia to follow. Reed shut the laptop and stood, his movements quick and nervous. "They're closing in," Reed said, his voice shaking. "I don't know how much longer I can keep this up." "We're getting you out," Adrian assured him. "But we need the files. Everything you've gathered." Reed nodded and handed over a USB drive. "It's all here. Transactions, emails, even surveillance footage of Lionel's private meetings." Adrian pocketed the drive, his expression hardening. "Good, now let's move." As they descended the stairs, the sound of engines roaring in the distance sent a chill down Amelia's spine. She turned to Adrian, panic creeping into her voice. "They're here." Adrian didn't hesitate. "Reed, take Amelia and get to the car. I'll draw them away." "What?" Amelia exclaimed, grabbing his arm. "You can't just—" "I can and I will." Adrian cut her off. His tone softened as he looked at her. "This is the only way. Trust me." Before she could protest further, Adrian sprinted toward the opposite end of the warehouse. Amelia's heart sank as she watched him disappear into the shadows. "Come on," Reed urged, pulling her toward the exit. "We don't have time." The two of them reached the SUV and climbed inside just as headlights flooded the warehouse lot. Amelia gripped the steering wheel, her mind racing with worry for Adrian. "He knows what he's doing," Reed said, as if reading her thoughts. "We just have to trust him." But Amelia couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go horribly wrong. Her gaze shifted to the warehouse entrance, willing Adrian to emerge. Suddenly, a deafening explosion shattered the night. Flames erupted from the far side of the warehouse, sending a plume of smoke into the air. Amelia's heart lurched. "Adrian!" Before she could act, the passenger door flew open and Adrian jumped into the seat. His face was smeared with soot, but his expression was resolute. "Drive." Amelia floored the gas pedal, the SUV tearing out of the lot as Lionel's men scrambled to regroup. The roar of pursuing vehicles grew louder, but Adrian was already working on a plan. "Take the next left," he instructed, his voice calm despite the chaos. Amelia followed his directions, weaving through the narrow streets of the industrial district. The SUV's engine roared as they accelerated, the headlights of their pursuers closing in. "Now what?" Amelia asked, her grip on the wheel tightening. Adrian pulled out a remote device and pressed a button. Behind them, a series of small charges detonated, creating a wall of debris that blocked the road. "That should buy us some time," Adrian said, sinking back into his seat. Amelia glanced at him, her chest tightening with a mix of relief and frustration. "Don't ever do that again." Adrian managed a faint smile. "Noted." They drove through the night, eventually reaching another safe house Adrian had arranged. The tension in the SUV gave way to a tentative calm as they settled into their temporary refuge. Amelia sat beside Adrian, her gaze steady. "You risked everything back there." "So did you," Adrian replied, "and it paid off. We have the evidence." "But at what cost?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You could have been." "I wasn't," Adrian interrupted gently. "Because we're a team, and as long as we stick together, we'll make it through this." Amelia nodded, her resolve strengthening. The road ahead was still fraught with danger, but for the first time, she felt a glimmer of hope. Together, they might just stand a chance. The safe house was located in a secluded valley, surrounded by dense woods that provided natural cover. Inside, the space was stark but functional, with a small kitchen, a couple of bedrooms, and a makeshift command center where Adrian and Reed immediately got to work. Amelia paced the room, the events of the night still playing in her mind. The memory of the explosion and Adrian's near capture lingered like a weight in her chest. Finally, she stopped and turned to him. "Adrian, what's on that drive?" she asked, her voice firm. He looked up from the laptop, his expression serious. "Proof. Everything Lionel's been doing. Illegal takeovers, money laundering, and his ultimate plan to monopolize global logistics." Reed leaned over Adrian's shoulder, pointing to the screen. "It's worse than we thought. He's using offshore accounts to hide transactions linked to human trafficking." Amelia's stomach churned. "Human trafficking? That's vile." "It's not just about greed anymore," Adrian said. "This is about power and control. He's exploiting people, industries, entire systems to feed his empire." Amelia's hands balled into fists. "And no one stopped him?" Reed shook his head. "He's insulated. Every deal has layers of plausible deniability. Even if someone suspects, they can't trace it back to him directly. Until now," Adrian added, holding up the USB drive. "This is his Achilles heel." The trio spent hours sifting through the files. Reed's technical expertise and Adrian's strategic mind worked in tandem, while Amelia's sharp intuition helped them piece together Lionel's sprawling network of corruption. Amelia spotted a file labeled Genesis. "What's this?" she asked, opening it. The screen displayed a blueprint for a state-of-the-art logistics hub. At first glance, it seemed like a legitimate project, but the attached memos revealed a darker truth. Adrian read aloud. "Genesis isn't just about efficiency, it's about dominance. Once operational, it will control 80% of the global supply chain." He paused, his jaw tightening. "He's creating a chokehold on essential resources." Amelia frowned. "If he controls the supply chain, he controls economies. That's terrifying." "It gets worse," Reed said, pointing to another memo. "He's planning to sabotage competitors' hubs, causing shortages and chaos. People will have no choice but to rely on Genesis." Adrian leaned back, his face clouded with anger. He's not just playing with money, he's playing with lives. As dawn approached, the team formulated a plan. The first step was to expose Lionel's operations to the world, but it wouldn't be easy. Lionel had powerful allies and the means to bury any scandal. "We need to release this strategically," Adrian said. "If we go public all at once, he'll suppress it before it gains traction." Amelia nodded. "So we need to leak it piece by piece, targeting his weakest points first." "Exactly," Adrian replied. "We'll start with his smaller crimes, the ones that are easy to verify. Once his credibility is shaken, we hit him with the big stuff." Reed added, "I can set up an anonymous site to host the evidence. We'll use it to leak documents, videos, and memos over time, but we'll need media outlets to amplify it." Adrian smirked. "I have a few contacts who owe me favors." Amelia crossed her arms. "What about legal action? If we're going after him, we need to make sure he's not just disgraced but also held accountable." "Already in motion," Adrian said. "I've been working with international agencies to build a case. This drive is the final piece they needed." With the plan in place, Adrian finally allowed himself to relax, sinking into a chair. Amelia sat across from him, studying his face. "You've been doing this for a long time, haven't you?" she asked softly. Adrian met her gaze, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Long enough to know the cost, and yet you keep going," she said. "Why?" His expression grew somber. "Because someone has to. Lionel's not the first man I've taken down, and he won't be the last. But it's not just about justice. It's about giving people a fighting chance." Amelia leaned forward. "You're risking everything for people you've never met. And now," Adrian said, his voice firm, "I'm risking it for someone I have." Her breath caught, her heart skipping a beat. She looked away, trying to steady herself. "I didn't ask for any of this." "I know," he said gently. "But you're here now and you're stronger than you realize." Their eyes met, the unspoken connection between them growing stronger. For a moment, the weight of their mission faded, replaced by a quiet understanding that they were no longer fighting alone. The next phase of their plan required allies, and not the ordinary kind. Adrian knew that to bring Lionel down, they needed someone with access to the inner workings of his empire. The team gathered in the Safe House's command center. The tension was palpable as Adrian pulled up a dossier on a potential contact. "This is Talia Navarro," he began, pointing to a photo of a sharp-eyed woman in her mid-30s. Her dark hair was pulled into a sleek ponytail, and her tailored suit exuded power. "She's Lionel's former head of operations. She left his organization 3 years ago after a fallout over his methods." Amelia leaned closer to the screen. "If she's not with him anymore, why hasn't she exposed him?" "Because Lionel knows how to silence people," Adrian replied. "But Talia is different. She's ambitious and pragmatic. She didn't leave because of morals. She left because she saw the ship sinking and wanted to survive." Reed raised an eyebrow. "And you think she'll help us?" "She doesn't have a choice," Adrian said. "I know where she's been hiding and what she's been up to. We'll make her see that working with us is her best chance to clear her name." Amelia and Adrian traveled to an upscale resort in the Caribbean, where Talia had been living under the radar. The pristine beaches and luxurious villas made it hard to believe they were on the brink of a high-stakes negotiation. They found Talia in the resort's exclusive lounge, sipping a martini. She noticed them before they even reached her table, her sharp gaze locking onto Adrian. "Well, if it isn't Adrian Kane," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "I was wondering when you'd show up." "Talia," Adrian greeted her coolly, pulling out a chair for Amelia. "We need to talk." Talia's eyes flicked to Amelia, taking in her presence with a knowing smirk. "And who's this? Your new partner in crime?" Amelia met her gaze evenly. "Someone who's not afraid to take down a man like Lionel." Talia raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Bold, I like that. But why should I care what happens to Lionel? I've built a nice little life here far away from his mess." Adrian leaned forward. "Because that nice little life is on borrowed time. Lionel hasn't forgotten about you. He's already tied up loose ends, and you're next." Talia's expression faltered just for a moment. "You're bluffing." Adrian slid a folder across the table. Inside were photos of Lionel's enforcers trailing her movements, along with intercepted messages ordering her elimination. Talia's hand tightened around her glass. "So, what's your plan?" "We take him down," Adrian said. "Completely. And when it's over, Your name gets cleared, and you get to keep that life you've built. And if I refuse? Adrian's gaze hardened. Then you'll keep running, and it's only a matter of time before Lionel finds you. Talia studied him for a long moment, then shifted her focus to Amelia. And you? Why are you involved in this? Amelia's voice was steady. Because Lionel tried to use me as a pawn, and I'm not someone who lets that slide. Talia chuckled, her smirk returning. All right, you've got my attention. But if we're doing this, I'm calling the shots. Adrian shook his head. You're helping us, not the other way around. And if you try anything, I'll make sure Lionel isn't the only one with nowhere to run. A tense silence hung between them. But then Talia extended her hand. Fine, let's take the bastard down. Back at the safe house, Talia joined the team, her expertise quickly proving invaluable. She provided insight into Lionel's operations, including the locations of his hidden assets and the identities of his key associates. Lionel's greatest strength is also his weakness, Talia explained during a briefing. He's paranoid. He trusts no one completely, which means his entire network relies on him. If we take him out, the whole thing collapses. But how do we get to him? Reed asked. He's surrounded by security. We make him come to us, Talia said with a sly smile. Lionel has one vulnerability, his ego. If he thinks someone's threatening his empire, he'll show up to handle it personally. Adrian nodded. Then we give him a reason to come out of hiding. The team set their plan into motion, leaking carefully selected pieces of evidence to the media. The first story exposed Lionel's financial fraud, causing his stock prices to plummet. Then came the leaked documents tying him to illegal offshore accounts, triggering investigations by international regulators. As the pressure mounted, Lionel's fury became evident. He released public statements denying the allegations, but his usual confidence was visibly shaken. Now we wait, Adrian said as they monitored the fallout. It's only a matter of time before Lionel makes his move. Amelia glanced at Talia, who seemed more invested in their mission than she let on. Do you think he'll take the bait? Talia smirked. Oh, he'll take it. And when he does, we'll be ready. Lionel Stanton's world was unraveling. The media frenzy over his alleged crimes, the crashing stock prices of his conglomerate, and the increasing scrutiny from international law enforcement agencies painted a grim picture. Lionel, however, wasn't a man to crumble under pressure. He thrived on power plays, and this situation was no different, or so he thought. In a dimly lit office of his high-security estate, Lionel studied the reports from his trusted lieutenant, Grayson. These leaks? Lionel's voice was dangerously calm. They're too specific to be random. Grayson nodded grimly. It's Adrian Kane. He's behind this. We've tracked movements that align with his usual tactics. Lionel slammed his fist onto the desk, the sound echoing through the room. Adrian Kane. I should have crushed him years ago. And now he's pulling strings to dismantle everything I've built. We've identified one of his associates, Grayson added. A woman named Amelia Clark. She's been seen with him multiple times over the last month. Lionel's lips curled into a predatory smile. Good. If Adrian wants to play this game, we'll hit him where it hurts. Adrian, Amelia, and Talia reviewed the final stages of their plan. Talia's insider knowledge of Lionel's operations allowed them to predict his next move with startling accuracy. He'll go after Amelia, Talia said bluntly, earning a sharp glance from Adrian. She's the one person in this group he can use as leverage against you. Adrian's jaw tightened. That won't happen. We'll stay ahead of him. I can handle myself, Amelia interjected, her voice resolute. I knew the risks when I joined this. Adrian turned to her, his expression softening. This isn't about questioning your strength. It's about ensuring your safety. Talia leaned back in her chair, smirking. You two make quite the team. No wonder Lionel's losing his mind. Ignoring her comment, Adrian refocused the discussion. We'll use his predictable nature against him. If he thinks Amelia is his way to me, we can lure him into a controlled environment. And then what? Reed asked. Lionel's not the kind of man you just arrest. He has contingencies. That's where we change the game, Adrian replied. We make him believe that everyone, his allies, his resources, his network, is gone. When he feels completely isolated, he'll have no choice but to surrender. Amelia played her part perfectly. Disguised in a sharp black dress and carrying a false identity, she attended a high-profile charity gala where Lionel's associates were expected to be. It was risky, but the team had planted whispers of Amelia's involvement in Adrian's operations, ensuring that the information would reach Lionel. As she mingled among the crowd, she felt the weight of hidden eyes on her. Lionel's men were here, just as expected. She sipped her champagne and casually checked her reflection in the glass's surface, a trick Adrian had taught her. Sure enough, a man in a tailored suit was watching her from the bar, pretending to be engrossed in his drink. Amelia's earpiece buzzed. "You've got a tail," Adrian's voice came through. "Head toward the balcony. We'll handle the rest." With practiced ease, she weaved through the crowd and stepped out onto the grand balcony overlooking the city skyline. The cool night air calmed her nerves, though she was acutely aware of the approaching footsteps. "Miss Clark," a smooth voice called out. She turned to find the man from the bar standing a few feet away. His smile was polite, but his eyes betrayed his intent. "I believe you've caught the attention of a powerful man." Amelia's heart raced, but she maintained her composure. "I'm flattered, but I don't think we've met." "Oh, we haven't," he replied, stepping closer. "But my employer is very interested in you." Before he could say more, the sound of a helicopter filled the air. Amelia turned to see a sleek black chopper descending onto the rooftop of the nearby building. Adrian's voice came through her earpiece again. "You're clear. Get to the extraction point." Amelia didn't hesitate. She darted past the man and headed inside, weaving through the crowd as Lionel's men tried to follow. The team had planned for this, and as Amelia exited the building, a black SUV pulled up. "Get in!" Talia called from the passenger seat, holding the door open. Amelia dove in just as the SUV sped off, leaving the stunned pursuers behind. With Lionel's attention fully focused on Amelia, the team initiated the last phase of their plan. Adrian leaked a final damning piece of evidence, a signed agreement between Lionel and a notorious arms dealer, directly to the authorities. The media caught wind, and the public outcry was immediate. Meanwhile, Talia used her connections to spread false information that Lionel's closest allies were turning against him, sowing chaos within his ranks. His once loyal associates began cutting ties, fearing the fallout. It all came to a head when Lionel himself stepped into the trap. Lionel arrived at the prearranged location, flanked by his remaining security detail. He believed he was meeting a trusted ally to negotiate a ceasefire with Adrian. Instead, he found Adrian, Amelia, and Talia waiting for him, backed by a team of armed agents. "This ends here, Lionel," Adrian said, his voice cold. Lionel's face twisted with rage. "You think you've won. You're nothing compared to me." "No," Amelia said, stepping forward. "You're the one who's nothing now. Look around. Your empire is gone." Lionel scanned the room, his bravado faltering as he realized the truth. His men lowered their weapons, surrendering to the agents surrounding them. Adrian stepped closer. "You destroyed lives for profit, manipulated people, and thought you were untouchable. But no one is untouchable." As Lionel was handcuffed and led away, he snarled, "This isn't over." Adrian watched him go, his expression unreadable. "Yes, it is." The trial of Lionel Stanton became the story of the decade. Media outlets worldwide covered every twist and turn, from the incriminating evidence to the testimonies that painted a vivid picture of his empire's corruption. Lionel's stoic demeanor crumbled under the weight of irrefutable proof, and when the verdict was finally announced, guilty on all counts, a collective sigh of relief swept through the public. Adrian and Amelia watched the announcement from a quiet cafe, away from the media frenzy. The room buzzed with muted conversations, but their corner was cocooned in relative silence. A celebratory article flashed across the television screen, accompanied by a photograph of Lionel being escorted out of the courtroom. "It's done," Amelia said, the words carrying a mix of triumph and exhaustion. Adrian sipped his coffee, a faint smile gracing his lips. "It's done, but this isn't just the end of his reign. It's the beginning of something better." Amelia nodded, her gaze lingering on Adrian. Over the months of working together, she had seen layers of him that few had. Beneath his calculating mind and calm exterior was a man driven by justice, someone who carried his scars with quiet dignity. She felt a warmth bloom in her chest, an acknowledgement that their partnership had become something far more personal. "You never told me what happens next," she said, breaking the silence. Adrian leaned back in his chair, his smile widening. "That depends. What do you want to happen next?" Amelia laughed softly, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. For once, I'd like a life that doesn't involve running from armed goons or unearthing corporate conspiracies. I think you've earned that, he said. But you're also one of the smartest, bravest people I've ever met. Whatever you decide, I know you'll make it extraordinary. She tilted her head, studying him. And what about you? Adrian hesitated, his gaze dropping to the table. I've spent so much time fighting for others. I'm not sure I've ever thought about what I want. Maybe it's time you did, she suggested, her voice soft but firm. Adrian met her eyes, something unspoken passing between them. The weight of their shared experiences, the danger, the victories, the sacrifices, bound them together in a way that transcended words. For the first time in years, Adrian felt a flicker of hope for himself, not just for the people he had vowed to protect, and it was because of her. Maybe it is, he said finally, his tone carrying a quiet resolve. As they left the cafe, the world outside felt brighter, the air lighter. Lionel's shadow no longer loomed over their futures, and though there were still battles to fight, they knew they wouldn't face them alone. Walking side by side, they blended into the crowd, two individuals who had found strength in each other and a chance at something more. Whatever lay ahead, they were ready. Together, ready. Together, ready. Together.